Now, from Greater Sandton and beyond, get ready for the Sandton Times Hour with your host, Alexander.
Ladies and gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, welcome to the Sandton Times Hour, also available on all leading digital audio platforms. It's edition 159. It's week 22 of 2024. And as always, if you'd like to get in touch, you can send through your questions, your comments, and your feedback by doing so on email, editor@sandtontimes.co.za, or connecting on social media at Sandton Times. Also, visiting the website, www.sandtontimes.co.za. And a very special welcome to everyone listening for the very first time. And of course, all our regular listeners. If you're in Johannesburg and Pretoria, across South Africa, everywhere and anywhere else in the world, if it's online or on air, wherever you are, I'm happy to report that all is well in Sandton land. And as every week, Vincenzo joins me again behind the mixing desk. Vincenzo, buongiorno. Good to have you back again. And yes, it's election week. Well, maybe not for you. I know you can't vote, but everyone else listening can vote, and they should vote. And I hope you've got your Wednesday, 29 May plans sorted out, how you want to do it. You've got a bit of a strategy in place. Maybe you vote first and then go have a breakfast or a brunch, or maybe you breakfast and brunch first and then go a little bit later. Maybe you're going with a group of people. Maybe you're going with the family, taking neighbors. Whatever the plan is, just make sure you make it happen on the 29th of May. And we'll get into some more details on that over the next hour. It's been an interesting week. This past week, I had the pleasure of moderating a panel discussion at the Sandton Convention Centre around regulations in the trading space. And anything to do with finances, actually. We spoke about copy trading, finfluencers. You know what a finfluencer is, Vincenzo? Somebody who influences, but on financial content. And I learned this week that you have to have a license to be able to give financial advice on social media. Can you believe it? Learn something new every day. Every day is a school day. But great turnout, good audience, and some very robust interactions there at the Finance Magnet Summit. And very interesting event to be part of. Also, a few shout-outs this week. I want to wish Devi a very happy birthday and all the best for the year ahead. And then as well as Sarah, wishing you a very speedy recovery. And we hope you get well soon. And don't forget to send me your messages during the week as well. And we'll also always try and slot them in here. If people are listening, we like to send them your messages as well. And as mentioned, it's a special focus this week with elections coming up. And by the looks of things, our international South African counterparts have set the tone for us. And of course, what we need to do to determine the next 5 years in South Africa. And so much has happened in the last 5 years. So let's just hope the next 5 years are completely different. Lockdowns, the whole lot. Just think about it. So, who are we talking to this week? Joining me in just a bit is an award-winning journalist based in London. She's going to tell us a bit more about the gees. Such a good South African word, gees. She experienced during the voting in London, and this should be quite a fascinating chat. And then I'm going to be joined by a renowned scenario planner who was there ahead of the 1994 elections, mapping out where South Africa was going way back then. And we'll do it again in the next hour for these elections. So this is going to be really fascinating. All this and more in the next hour.
Show some love.
Subscribe. Share.
Leave a review and rating for the Sandton Times Hour
on your favorite podcast app now.
It's a good question because lots of people have asked us that, what are you going to do going forward?
That's a great question.
It's a critically important question.
Such a great and interesting question.
I have not even thought about that until you've just said it.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
Well, South Africans cast their special votes in 111 South African missions around the world between the 17th and the 19th of May 2024, ahead of our national elections coming up, and around 78,000 citizens around the world are registered to vote. 24,000 voters registered and were approved to vote in London. And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Sandton Times Hour award-winning journalist Catherine White. Catherine joins me on the line from London right now. And welcome to the Sandton Times Hour, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Well, Catherine, before we get into our chat, let's play a little snippet from a conversation/video that you shot with a couple of South Africans in London.
So we're in Trafalgar Square in London, where thousands of people have come to cast their votes for the South African national elections. This is the biggest election in South African history for expats in the UK. Over 24,000 registered voters. People are feeling excited, passionate, a sense of pride, being around fellow South Africans, bringing the biltong, passing it along.
I'm looking for the biltong.
There's no electricity, there's no water and all those sort of things. So this is the change we are talking about, to say we need to see things changing.
Atmosphere is really, really festive. It was super easy to register and queue slightly long, but we've made it in the end. So
it was very easy. Just get on the train, sit for 2 hours, then you're in London. Well, I've done what I can to try and make a difference in South Africa's future. I just hope it's enough.
Because I was using my own car, so it wasn't that expensive. I'm sure people who are traveling by trains is quite expensive. I miss everything about South Africa. But yeah, we have to be here, work. I'm enjoying UK as well. I'm hoping the government that will be coming on power will put people first, people of South Africa.
It's just nice to be surrounded by South Africans, even though we're here in London, It is, it's like being at home, right? A bit nervous, excited. And it's just great to see people here with their savannas and their rugby shirts.
I think South Africans in general are just like very warm, friendly people, and like even though we deal with a lot of like we still do it with a smile on our face, and we are, like I said, hopeful, and yeah, I guess that's what just keeps us going as a nation.
Catherine White chatting to South Africans in London there, and now I'm going to turn the microphone on you, Catherine. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a South African, but you are based in London now.
That's right, Alex. So I'm based in London, but very much still a South African and traveling back to South Africa for work, for conferences, for any kind of journalism opportunities.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit more about your journalism career. How did you get into all of this?
Yeah, so I studied journalism at Rhodes, and then I went on to work in television as a television intern. And from there, I made a shift to radio. And then from radio, I went into documentary research. Documentary research took me to online video, working for Times Live and the Sunday Times. And then I just became a full-time freelancer. So I'm a little bit all over the place in terms of journalism, but storytelling is very much at the core of what I do, and particularly people stories. I'm very much focused on how people are affected.
So it wasn't a complete stretch for you to go out on a sunny day in London, which is probably quite rare, and have a chat to some South Africans from what we heard were wrapped around blocks and blocks of London to go and vote.
Alex, how could that be a stretch for me? I think it's in my DNA to go out with a microphone and speak to people,
Yeah.
What an incredible experience. It was a sunny day. There was a moment where I didn't actually feel like I was in London. And I posted this video on Instagram where I just said, wow, I just had this crazy experience. I'm surrounded by so many South Africans. People are singing Shosholoza, people are dancing, and I'm just kind of observing and taking everything in. And at some stage, there was a police vehicle that drove past me, excuse me. And as I glanced over, I realized that's a London police vehicle. This is not a South African car, and we're not in South Africa right now. So for a moment, I really felt like I was at home. There was definitely no effort in going out and, finding out what people are feeling and how the voting's been going.
Well, listen, it certainly set the tone for us back home here in South Africa, because it seemed like the expats, or those who had moved to England specifically, or London, where they all voted, really came out in their numbers. I mean, I think we're looking at something like double the amount of people that had voted this year than compared to 2019.
The registration has also doubled. So it's not just the double number of people that have actually came out. It's that more and more people have registered. But I think if you look at the bigger picture, the UK holds the majority of South African expats worldwide. So that's between about 750,000 to about 1 million South Africans based in the UK. And out of those, say, 750,000, and this is according to the Business Chamber and the Chamber of Commerce, out of those 750,000, only 24,535 actually registered. And out of those, that sort of 24,500 registered voters, we had about 54% voter turnout, so just over half. We know with the previous election, the DA got about 70% of the votes abroad. But with this election, there were so many different political parties that really seemed quite passionate. And yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the votes do this time around.
Well, I definitely want to get into that with you. I'm chatting to Catherine White. She's an award-winning journalist based in London. We're chatting about South Africans voting in London, but also voting from across the UK. They all had to come to London to vote because I believe that's sort of the only official voting station that you could go to. We're going to continue this conversation right after a quick break.
Every season is a fresh start. Fire up your wellness and join Virgin Active in May. You'll get 50% off fees over 3 months. Join on Premier with 25% off and gym at any club anytime for a year. Call 0860-GET-FIT or visit a club to get started. virginactive.co.za. T's and C's apply. Give your body the autumn it deserves.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
So, Catherine, we were chatting about your experience speaking to South Africans voting in London ahead of our general elections coming up in literally a hop, skip, and a jump. Were people quite open to chatting to you? I mean, it seemed like it was quite a festive atmosphere, which is quite unusual, I think, for most elections.
Yes, I think it was a festive atmosphere, but I think that's because, it's the first time that in a very long time for many of these South Africans who've come out to cast their votes, that they could be surrounded by so many of their own. So I think that definitely created a festive environment. Even the IEC officials were saying to me that because the day before the voting, I went to go and speak to the media liaison, and the IEC officials were just really happy to be with me. So when we said goodbye, it was almost like, hey, let's give you a hug, and they were like, oh, I miss home, I miss South Africa. So people were passing biltong around. Like I said, there was music. It was a bit of a party, to be honest.
No, I mean, it really looks remarkable, and also by the sounds of things, it sounded like it was a really well-spirited crowd. You did mention before the break, that there was quite a bit of political party activity. Did you see quite a few other political parties? I mean, apart from the DA, who had fared very well in previous years, did you see a presence by a lot of other political parties on the ground before, in the build-up, and also on the day?
So not at all with the build-up. There was no canvassing whatsoever. And if there was any canvassing, that was done online. So political parties would reach people via email or online events. Not that I'm aware of any of them personally, but that's what I've been told, is that there was no, that canvassing did happen online. Again, didn't see it myself. Nothing outside London. I would speak to South Africans in the streets and in Trafalgar Square, and so many of them didn't know that it was actually voting time. Oh, was I supposed to register? Can I go now? There is a bit of a process. I think one of the things that happened that also kind of threw people off was the mix-up with the dates. So, London inevitably has 2 dates, 2 days in which South Africans can go and vote. And this is mainly because, as you mentioned, South Africans have to travel from all across the UK, including Scotland.
Wow.
To come down to London to cast their ballot. And this is also an expensive process for many South Africans. So as much as people might be earning pounds, the cost of living here is quite high. And I think a lot of people are struggling in the UK as well. So expensive to come down. Someone who lives a mere hour away on a train could pay £80 to just come and cast their vote. So you can imagine the cost involved.
Wow.
For someone to come from far. So South Africans were granted 2 days to vote, and that would be the 18th and the 19th of May. But when South Africans registered, some of them received an email from IEC saying, you can come and vote on either the 17th or 18th, but we know that President Ramaphosa announced that it's the 18th and the 19th. Not the 17th and 18th.
Oh, wow.
So some South Africans traveled from far on the 17th, which was the Friday, and they were ready to vote. And so luckily, IEC had already been preparing for the elections and for the voting process. So when those South Africans did arrive, they could cast their ballots. So that's a good thing. I think even though there was that mix-up with communication, the fact that people could still vote. I mean, it was sort of an issue on the IEC side, so they sort of had to allow South Africans to vote in that moment. And I voted as well on the Friday. Just when I spoke to the media liaison, as I arrived, they said, "Are you here to vote?" And I was like, "No, voting is tomorrow." "No, but you can vote if you want to." So, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm just showing you my thumb.
Yeah, there's a little bit left, a little bit of the mark left on your thumb. But it's quite an interesting thing that you raised there. And I think if there's anything that we take out of this point specifically, it's the fact that you have no excuse not to go and vote on the 29th of May. If people are prepared to pay, I'm trying to do a quick conversion here, 1,600 Rand for a train trip. Never mind flying from Scotland. Never mind, I've heard some news reports where people were flying from the Dominican Republic to New York to go and vote. I mean, these are some serious commitments. I mean, I have no doubt people maybe made a little bit of an outing out of it or a holiday, etc. But that is quite a length to go and cast your vote. Versus hopping down the road or jumping on a bus and doing it literally down the road here. And it just goes to show that people are very determined to make a difference. And I think there were also quite a few people who'd mentioned that they're also trying to make their way back to South Africa at one point, and that's why they're voting, because they want to come back to a country that is in better shape than the way they left it.
Yeah.
Is that the sense you got as well?
Yeah, I think South Africa will always be home. That video that you speak of, I uploaded it onto TikTok and it got like 350,000 views and the comments were just non-stop. And that's quite interesting, is looking at the debate online and looking what people are saying after the video was posted. So yes, some people say, "Why are you voting abroad when you don't even live back home?" South Africa is home. And even if we're not based there right now, we care about our people, we care about where we come from, and we care about where the future are going.
I think there's something quite beautiful about that, something that I think not even brand South Africa can actually capture. There's something very South African about South Africans abroad, especially when you see a K-Way jacket or a Springbok jersey in a foreign airport. Somehow you are united in a very strange way, even though you've literally just met.
Yeah. Yeah,
now,
there's some kind of a connection there, definitely.
It's amazing. Catherine, were there any surprising stories that you came across? Any interesting conversations that you had with some of the people standing in line? I mean, you'd mentioned some people had come from far away. I see there was one guy who came from Manchester. You mentioned Scotland.
I don't know if surprised is the word. I think I understand that so many people hold different opinions and different views. The one thing that was a common thread was that people want to see change, regardless of who they voted for. And this actually included one of the ANC representatives that I spoke to. Is people want to see change. And they understand as well that this particular person spoke about President Ramaphosa's big job to clean up the mess of the last 9 years with Zuma's presidency and the effect that that's had. But they also want to see change. So regardless of political party and affiliation, that has been the common thread. And I'm not shocked by that. No, I think everyone feels the same in that way.
Catherine, if there's anything that you've personally taken away from this walkabout that you did, capturing these moments, what would that be?
I think it was just so special. It was such a special place to be in my life and in terms of history, because this was the biggest election for internationals in South African history. We've never had so many people registered. I've never been around so many South Africans abroad, and just being able to be part of that moment in history, because I think we're going to see a lot of change. I think we're going to see some very interesting things happening politically, and being part of that was an honor.
And I think that's the reason why so many people in media are in media, is to witness history unfold. I've been chatting to award-winning journalist Catherine White, based in London. She set out to shoot a brief look at the voting taking place in and around London this past week. And Catherine, it's been such a pleasure to chat to you on the Sandton Times Hour, and thanks for making the time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
And as we get into the second half of the Sandton Times Hour, don't forget that if you caught something intriguing during this week's show, but you missed some of the details, don't worry, don't stress. you head over to the sandtontimes.co.za and you can get onto the show notes, and we'll have a comprehensive breakdown of everything that we discussed, some of the highlights, some further reading, some links, all of those things, so you don't have to jot it down on a piece of paper or try and remember it. It's all going to be there in good time. And also don't forget, you can connect with the Sandton Times on social media. So whatever social media platform you're on, connect on there at Sandton Times, and also you can engage there with a message, a DM, a voice note, whatever it is that you prefer. And it's always good to hear from you when you're listening. Right, joining me in a moment is a renowned independent scenario planner and author of several best-selling books on the future thinking and on scenario planning. I'm truly honored to have him on the Sandton Times Hour as we move into an election week, but also a post-election South Africa conversation. Clem Sunter, welcome to the Sandton Times Hour.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm very pleased to be on your show.
Well, Clem, I mean, you have been, I feel, at a moment like this before. If I take you back to probably the 80s and 90s, when South Africa was at the cusp of its first democratic election, or possibly not even at a point where there was a conversation around an election. And I kind of feel like there's a similar energy around the country and around the discussions that we're having as we move into the 2024 election.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was the mid-'80s that we produced the high road, low road scenarios for South Africa. The high road of negotiation leading to a political settlement, and the low road of confrontation leading to civil war in a wasteland. And I can tell you, a lot of people in the mid-'80s just thought it simply can't come about because there's no way that the National Party will ever negotiate with the ANC. But it did. It came about and showed the power of scenario planning, because you could never have forecasted. And we had two very special leaders in Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, and they made the scenario possible. But one of the things that the scenario team said in the mid-'80s, which has now proved prophetic, is that there were always two crossroads to taking the high road in the long term. The first was the political negotiation, and that had to result in a proper democracy. But then they said the second thing is that we've got to have an economy growing at 3 to 5% per annum at least. And it's got to be an inclusive economy which reflects our democracy. And that kind of crossroads can come between 10 or 20 years after the political transition. And here we are. We are at that economic crossroads right now. And so this is a crunch election to determine how we're going to proceed.
I mean, I think half the fascination with what it is that you do, because most of the time you sit down and you look ahead and you say, well, what are we in for? What are the flags? Now you can look back on 30 years and almost kind of do sort of a retrospective and see what has played out, what hasn't played out. And after 30 years of democracy, Clem, what is your analysis? What is your take on how things have played out in terms of what you had anticipated, what you hadn't anticipated for South Africa?
You know, the Mandela years were golden years. We had a high economic growth rate. People were coming together. He was an incredible leader. I mean, I had the privilege of meeting him in prison because he asked me to go through the scenarios just before he was released in 1990. And I had 5 hours with the great man in his cottage in Victor Verster. And he just came across as this extraordinary guy who'd been in prison for such a long time. But his whole passion was reconciliation between all South Africans. And I really do think that he achieved that. And they were great years. Mbeki was okay, but it wasn't quite as good. But the economy nevertheless continued growing. Unfortunately, the whole thing started falling apart after Zuma came in. And we now have an incredibly tough economy, not just because of South Africa itself. The whole world has been in a very tough state since the financial crash of 2008. And of course, the pandemic didn't help either. And now we're in a very polarized world where the globalization of last century is simply not taking place. So we have a tough external environment, on top of which we have all our local problems, such as load shedding and all the other ones that we've had to cope with. So this is the moment when we have to create this new economy after the election.
Well, I'm not quite sure if there's still much to say about the election. I know it's been weeks and months of analysis, people doing polls, I mean, almost on an hourly basis. And, with, I wouldn't say minutes to go to the election, but it does feel like it. I'm not quite sure if there's much to add to it. But Clem, is there anything else that you foresee as we go into the election that you find interesting or that you've observed?
Well, let's go through the scenarios. The one is that the ANC just gets over 50%. And I must say that pollsters are beginning to play that scenario more at the moment, whereas, a few weeks ago, they were consistently saying that the ANC would get in the 40s. But there seems to be a last-minute spurt in amongst ANC voters to vote. The second scenario is they get in the upper 40s and then can go into coalition with some of the smaller parties in order to govern. And then, of course, the low 40s, people talk about whether it could be an alliance with the DA or the EFF. Those are the three scenarios, and on a daily basis, they seem to be changing. But whatever the outcome, it's a different South Africa, because we've been through the post-liberation process. Now we've got to get back to reality, to creating a winning nation on the ground in terms of our economy.
And that also boils down to how many people actually show up at the elections as well, because I know part of the polling process, there's also this percentage exercise where people are saying, well, if half the people show up, if 75% show up, if all of them show up, that's also going to determine what ends up happening.
Yeah, and that's where the sort of pollsters and experts are divided. Nobody really knows how many people are going to show up on the day. I mean, I think the IEC will do a great job. So it's really going to be up to individuals to vote. And so my main message is, for heaven's sake, vote, because this is probably the most crucial watershed election that the country has faced since it became a true democracy. And so I hope that it's in the late 60s, 70s, even the 80s, rather than, being a disappointing turnout in the 50s.
What are your scenarios telling you in terms of where things could go? And what do you think would be the best outcome for South Africa in terms of best possible scenario?
Well, let me go through three scenarios, which I was at a meeting the other day and I listened to. And the group that gave them are the Indlula Miti research team. Indlula Miti in Nguni means giraffe, and they've since 2017 been peering over the trees to look at what possible changes can take place on the horizon. And they gave this unbelievably good presentation on possible scenarios post the election to 2035, and you can certainly look them up on the internet. The first scenario, they did it around birds, by the way, and I've always said you've got to have a catchy phrase, like high road, low road was a catchy, you've got to have catchy phrases so that it gets into the public domain and people start talking to one another about the scenarios. And they centered it around birds, and the first one was the hardy-dar blah blah scenario, which is just like the bird, it takes off, it squawks and squeaks and makes a very loud noise, but not much else. And yeah, in that scenario, you would have more of the same, more empty promises, no real changes because no real action is taken. A lot of people feel that is quite a likely scenario. And of course, what may happen in that scenario is that the country becomes more separated into enclaves as people try and adjust to their own lives. The second scenario is worse still. It's the vulture culture scenario. It's where we follow quite a few South American countries into a sort of semi-gangster state because we get back to the whole sort of thieving operation and pecking at the body of South Africa. And so the vulture culture scenario is the really negative one, where we could eventually end up as a wasteland or failed state. But it's the third scenario which really captured my imagination because it is exactly what I've been talking about for so many years. They called it weaver's nest. And it's the fact that weavers are small, sociable birds that build these gigantic nests because they get together. They put the twigs, the leaves, and all the other material together themselves. And it's not what they're saying to each other, it's what they do to build this nest. And right now, in South Africa, despite all the pessimism, we do have examples of the weaver's nest. You go to any shopping mall, any restaurant, any wine estate in South Africa, they're run brilliantly. They're world-class operations. It's why our tourism industry is still going strong, particularly here in the Western Cape, because the service is incredible, and it's by a team of, completely different South Africans of all colors. And when you have that kind of fixed objective, you get the brilliance of the team. And of course, we can all talk about the rugby and Siya Kolisi and what he did with a very diverse group of people and turned them into a world-class team. And yes, we only won by 1 point in the last 3 games, but we did it. We actually became world champions. And that is what the Weaver's Nest is all about, is having a government that really encourages people to grow their individual and community weaver's nests around the country. And, it's a flag I talk about a lot, which is the changing nature of work. I mean, in the last century, big business and big projects were creating hundreds of thousands of jobs around the world. But all that has changed because of automation and robots and other ways of manufacturing things and servicing them. So the major generator of jobs everywhere in the world now is small business and micro business. In America, they've just issued the statistic that 2/3 of the new jobs created every month in America are in small and micro business, in sort of states where people take 1 or 2 jobs, they start a business here. They're an entrepreneurial bunch, the Americans, and so their unemployment rate is under 4%. Europe is not like that. It has a much higher unemployment rate because people aren't nearly as entrepreneurial as they are in America. In South Africa, I've visited enough townships to realize that we have incredibly entrepreneurial economies there. And so the biggest thing that the new government can do is integrate the township economy into the mainstream economy. So all those brilliant entrepreneurs can take on 10, 15, 20 people, which will start to solve the unemployment crisis. So that's why I love the kind of name Weaver's Nest.
I must say, I quite enjoy that too. And I also quite enjoy the sporting analogy that's been coming up over the last couple of weeks as well. And I'm going to try and quote this correctly. I think it was Dan Corden who was talking about, us voting for essentially a soccer team. But you're not just voting for the captain, which would be the president. You're actually voting for the whole team. So there's no point if you've got a star player, but the rest of the team is not pulling along. So when you sit down and you look at that election ballot, you're going to have to decide, who are you voting for? Because you're not just voting for a person, you're voting for the whole team. And that team has to deliver, be it the whatever final you call it. That's what you're going for. Clem, we have to take a quick break, but I want to keep you on the line because we still have to chat about the international context in which all of this is happening. I'm chatting to independent scenario planner and author Clem Sunter. We're going to continue this conversation right after a quick break.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
Clem, we've been chatting about where the elections are going, what the possible scenarios could be, and hopefully they are on the favorable side rather than the more unfavorable side. I think you called it the vulture culture. Sounds like a real nightmare to have to deal with. This is obviously all happening against the backdrop of a lot of stuff happening around the world. We've got 2 wars happening. What is your outlook in terms of South Africa in the context of what's happening around the world?
Well, first, let me just go back to that marvelous analogy you drew before the break, which is the football team. I totally agree with you about that. But what is absolutely crucial about the team is the captain. And I have a flag which I talk about endlessly in the global economy, which is the leadership flag. and seeing who the world leaders are at the time that you live, because they can make such a difference to your life. And if you haven't got a positive relationship between world leaders, it can make a huge amount of difference to a country and to citizens within that country. And right now, we have three world leaders in Biden, Putin, and Xi. They're pursuing their own agendas. I know that Putin and Xi had a meeting the other day, but it's not the kind of positive relationship that you had in the late 80s when you had Maggie Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and Mikhail Gorbachev, who together got rid of the Cold War. They got rid of the Soviet Union. They got rid of the Berlin Wall. And so it was a magnificent thing that was achieved. And we've got to have similar leaders in South Africa, like Siya Kolisi, who really get us together to build that weaver's nest. But having said all that, the world's in a very tough state at the moment. I think it's in the most polarized situation I've had in my lifetime. And I've had a long life. And this is unbelievable what's going on in the world. And I mean, you have, as you say, Ukraine, you have what's going on in Israel. And then the bigger picture is that you have the West retiring into what I call the gilded cage scenario of having more bars so that illegal immigrants can't get into their countries. They allow the rest of the world to continue as long as it doesn't threaten their individual gilded cages. And then, of course, you have the rest of the world, and that is beginning to combine together. I mean, BRICS is the kind of rival organization now to the G7 and NATO. It's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and now a whole host of other nations are joining BRICS. So, we have developed this very divisive world where one of the key flags is trying to control your export markets to the point that you can remain neutral enough that nobody stops, you exporting to that particular country because you're seen on one side or the other. It's become a very critical feature of a winning nation. And therefore, it's a much more complex world now that South Africa is operating in. And the irony of the whole situation is this is taking place against probably the most existential flag that in my lifetime has gone up, which is the green flag of climate change. We're now seeing such extreme weather around the world because of the warming up of the atmosphere and the fact that you've now got atmospheric rivers, completely and utterly demolishing communities that are rained on. And you've got spectacular droughts in places like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Spain, and elsewhere. And so most environmentalists say, we thought this was going to happen in the late 2000s. It's not happening now. And we're in this polarized world when what we need is the scenario of a friendly planet where the leaders of the big economies like China and America are actually working together to overcome this serious problem that in the long run could affect our planet's sustainability and actually really destroy the lives of our children and grandchildren. So this is just such an unbelievable moment to have a polarized world when you need the exact opposite.
Well, Clem Sunter, I think you and I could probably chat for hours on end. I feel like we should be doing a special on this, but I think we're going to have to regroup after the elections, maybe let everything settle a bit and have a look at what these flags are looking like. But we've had the most fantastic conversation. Clem Sunter, scenario planner and author, it's been such a pleasure having you on the Sandton Times Hour, and thank you once again for giving generously of your time and your insights.
Thank you, Alexander, and best of luck to your station, because it is part of the Weaver's Nest.
And that's all we have time for this week on the Sandton Times Hour, as always available on all good podcast platforms, including Apple, Amazon, Spotify, AfriPods, Podcast Party as of this week, and so many more. So if you're looking for the podcast, or if somebody you know wants to have another listen to what we did this past hour, and maybe there's someone you want to share this past hour with, well, you can get the link and send it to them. You can also get in touch via email if you want to during the week, editor@sandtontimes.co.za, and on social media @Sandton Times, and also log on to www.sandtontimes.co.za. Feel free to send through your questions, comments, feedback, input. All of that's great, and all of that is welcome. And thank you, of course, to all our guests who made time to be on the show this week, and of course, the teamwork that makes all of this happen every single week. Thank you for listening, and let's do it all again next week.
That's it for this week. Thanks for listening to the Sandton Times Hour. And if you enjoyed it, be sure to share it.